The diner was the kind of place where the coffee was always hot, the pie was always fresh, and trouble usually announced itself before it walked through the door. That afternoon, it arrived on the thunder of motorcycle engines, a sound that made every patron look up from their plates, a sound that carried with it the promise of disruption. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his wheelchair near the window booth, absently stirring his coffee while watching the autumn leaves dance across the parking lot. His Air Force dress blues were pristine, the silver wings pinned above his chest catching the late afternoon sunlight. The wheelchair was new, only 6 months old, but the memories that put him in it felt ancient, carved deep into his bones like grooves in weathered stone. His legs, once strong enough to carry him through 12-hour shifts on the flight line, now lay motionless beneath the crisp fabric of his uniform trousers. He'd come to Miller's Diner because it was the only place in this small Nebraska town that reminded him of home, of normalcy, of a time when he could walk through a door without calculating whether his wheelchair would fit. The waitress, an older woman named Betty with kind eyes and a ready smile, had seated him by the window without fuss, without pity, treating him like any other customer. That simple dignity had meant everything. The bikers rolled into the parking lot like a storm front, 15 motorcycles. Maybe 20, their chrome gleaming, their engines purposely revving louder than necessary. Jake watched them dismount with the kind of swagger that came from believing the world owed you space. They wore leather vests covered in patches, their boots heavy enough to make the floorboards groan as they filed inside. Betty's smile faltered as they filled the diner, their voices booming, their laughter sharp and aggressive. They spread out across the counter and booths, taking up twice the space they needed. And Jake felt the atmosphere in the room shift from comfortable to tense in a matter of heartbeats. He turned his attention back to his coffee, hoping invisibility would be his armor. Well, what do we have here? The voice came from directly beside him, thick with mockery. Jake looked up to find a man the size of a refrigerator looming over his table, arms crossed, a sneer twisting his bearded face. Looks like G.I. Joe forgot how to walk. The diner went silent. Even the clatter from the kitchen seemed to pause. Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. Just having my coffee, friend. No trouble here, friend. The biker turned to his companions, who had begun to gather around. Did you hear that, boys? We're friends now! His laughter was cruel, and it spread through his group like wildfire. Tell me, Captain America, what's it like being half a man? Can't even stand up when a real man's talking to you. Another biker chimed in, younger, but equally venomous. Probably crashed his fancy jet because he couldn't handle it. Tax dollars wasted on losers who can't even... That's enough. Betty's voice cut through the mockery like a whip crack. She stood behind the counter, her small frame rigid with fury, a coffee pot gripped in her hand like a weapon. You apologize right now or you get out of my establishment. The head biker turned his sneer on her. Or what, Grandma? You gonna make us? Jake placed his hand gently on the table, drawing their attention back. His voice remained calm, though his knuckles had gone white around his coffee cup. It's all right, Betty, they're just words. He met the biker's eyes directly. I've been through worse than anything you can dish out. Yeah? Like what, learning to roll yourself to the bathroom? The laughter that followed was ugly, echoing off the walls, and Jake felt something inside him, something that had been barely holding together since the crash, begin to crack. Not from anger, but from exhaustion. From the weight of constantly having to prove his worth in a body that no longer cooperated. From the isolation of being seen as less than by people who knew nothing about what he'd sacrificed. He was about to excuse himself, to roll away with whatever dignity he could salvage. When the bell above the door chimed, one man walked in. Then another. Then 5 more. They came in uniform. Air Force dress blues, their shoes polished to a mirror shine, their backs straight and their eyes forward. They kept coming, filling the doorway, spreading through the diner with military precision. 10, 15, 20. The bikers' laughter died in their throats as they found themselves surrounded by an ocean of blue. 35 Air Force personnel, ranging from young airmen to a grizzled colonel with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons, filed into Miller's Diner and came to attention. The last one through the door gently let it close, and the bell's chime sounded like a declaration. The colonel, A man Jake recognized immediately as Colonel Richard Hayes, his former commanding officer, stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of authority earned through 3 decades of service. "Is there a problem here?" The head biker's face had gone pale beneath his beard. We were just what?" The colonel's eyes were steel. Just mocking a combat veteran? Just harassing a man who gave his ability to walk defending your right to ride those motorcycles freely across this country? The silence was absolute. The colonel turned to Jake and his expression softened. "Captain Morrison, didn't expect to find you here. We were on our way back from the ceremony at Offutt." He glanced at the bikers. "Lucky timing, it seems." A female major stepped forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Captain Morrison flew 73 combat missions. He's credited with saving an entire convoy of Marines when their position was overrun in Syria." She looked at the bikers with undisguised contempt. "He took ground fire protecting them. The crash that injured him happened because he stayed in the fight long enough to ensure every soldier on the ground made it out alive." Another officer spoke up, a young lieutenant with earnest eyes. "He's the reason I'm alive. He was my flight instructor. Taught me everything I know about staying calm under pressure." One by one, members of the Air Force began to speak, each sharing a memory, a story, a moment where Jake Morrison had made a difference. The bikers shrank back, their bravado evaporating like morning mist. The colonel placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "We heard you were in town. Thought we'd stop by to see you before heading back to base." He raised his voice slightly. "Everyone here wanted to pay respects to one of the finest pilots the Air Force has ever had." As one, all 35 service members came to attention and saluted. Jake sat frozen, his throat tight with emotion. Slowly, his hand rose to return the salute, and in that moment, he wasn't a man in a wheelchair. He was a pilot, a leader, a brother in arms to these people who had traveled hours just to show him he mattered. The head biker cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice had lost all its venom. "Captain, He struggled with the words, shame coloring his features. "I'm sorry." "We were way out of line." Jake nodded slowly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." The bikers filed out quietly, their departure lacking any of the theatrical noise of their arrival. Through the window, Jake watched them mount their motorcycles and leave, but not before the head biker turned back one last time. Offering a respectful nod that Jake returned, Betty brought out pie, enough for everyone, on the house. The diner filled with conversation and laughter, with stories of missions and mishaps, with the warm familiarity of family. The colonel pulled up a chair beside Jake. "You doing okay, son? Really?" Jake looked around at the faces surrounding him, people who saw him, truly saw him, not just the wheelchair. "Better now, sir." "Much better?" "Good, because the Academy's asking for you. They want you to teach a course on tactical flight operations. Figured you might want a reason to get back on base regularly." Hope, fragile and bright, flickered in Jake's chest. "I'd like that, sir." As the afternoon stretched into evening, Jake Morrison realized something profound. He hadn't lost his ability to soar when he lost his legs. His wings had simply changed form. They existed now in the lives he'd touched, the students he'd trained, the respect of those who truly understood the cost of service. The wheelchair wasn't a limitation. It was simply a different vehicle for a journey that was far from over. And surrounded by his Air Force family in a small Nebraska diner, Jake finally understood that some battles aren't won in the sky. They're won in moments of connection, in standing up for what's right, whether on 2 legs or 4 wheels, and in remembering that true strength has nothing to do with the body you inhabit. It lives in the heart that refuses to quit beating.